Welcome to the call, everyone. My name is Caroline Colas. I am the Senior Director of Health and Wellness at the Marlene Meyerson JCC Manhattan. Today on our Lunch and Learn call, a series that we have been conducting since COVID began with the Whole Being Institute, we're going to be talking about tips for making a successful career transition during COVID with Susan Peppercorn. Though the weakened economy presents challenges, COVID-19 offers unique opportunities for people who want to make a career pivot. In this section, Executive Transition Coach Susan Peppercorn will discuss the opportunities and challenges of changing careers during this unique period and how to decide if it's a right time for you to make a change. Susan Peppercorn is an executive transition coach, writer, and speaker. She has coached clients from companies including Novartis Pharmaceuticals, Harvard University, and State Street Global Advisors. Susan is a regular contributor to Harvard Business Review and Fast Company, and is the author of the best-selling book, Ditch Your Inner Critic: Evidence-Based Strategies to Thrive in Your Career. She's certified in positive psychology and positive psychology coaching. Susan is one of the fewer than 100 coaches worldwide certified in Stanford's Designing Your Life methodology. Welcome to the call, Susan. I am so excited that you are here.
Thank you so much. I am thrilled to be here.
Yeah, and I mean, there's so many questions I want to ask you about your work at Stanford, about your book, about the inner critic, about just career transitions in general. But could we start with your affiliation or your association, or how you even found out about the Whole Being Institute?
Well, that's really happenstance and a very positive one. So I had gone to Kripalu, which is a yoga training center for people who may not be familiar with Kripalu, only once in my life, and I attended there with a friend and got on their mailing list and heard about the certificate in positive psychology, which was the very first class that was taking place there. And I was just fascinated by the whole idea of it. And they had a call to meet the faculty. And so I tuned into that call. And I was so excited by the whole idea that I signed up immediately. And it was life-changing for me on so many different levels. So I am so appreciative to Whole Being Institute that launched me in so many amazing directions. And that's why I'm here today.
Well, that's amazing. It's really true, isn't it, that these chance meetings or these calls or even talking to somebody can sometimes bring us to a new information that changes our career. And you had been a career coach previous to this, right?
Yes, but most of the work that I have done and most of my learning really started with the certificate in positive psychology and that class. And that's where I met Phoebe. So it was just the most extraordinary experience, and I'm so grateful for it.
Well, I know exactly what you're talking about, or at least close to it. I had the opportunity I'm taking the certificate this year, and I had an opportunity to have the intensive this past weekend. And boy, I said to Joanne, who's on the call, and one of my dear friends, oh my gosh, everyone should take this. This is amazing,
yeah,
right?
It is
This
amazing.
is really amazing.
Absolutely amazing.
Yeah.
And all of the faculty are just extraordinary.
I found that as well. Why don't you give us some context for career transitions and what we're looking at here? You said it's like an opportunity. What do you mean by that?
So I have a few slides. I'll wait a moment to put them up. But, you know, COVID-19, as someone said to me, was like a snow globe shaking everything up. And, you know, for some people, unfortunately, that meant they lost their job or they were furloughed from their job. And, but that may in itself have created an opportunity. But the other opportunity is that hiring managers and recruiters are now much more understanding. They're not looking for the same straight line path that they would have been in their hiring had this economic downturn not happened, had COVID not happened, and they're going to be much more understanding in how they look at people's resumes, the changes that they make or the changes that they're planning to make that they would have than before this happened. So I think that presents an opportunity. I will also say that, there are people that may have been thinking about wanting to make a change and they were like, well, maybe this isn't the right time. And, this has really shaken things loose because when things are chugging along well and the economy is doing well, people are hesitant to leave a good situation, a good paycheck, a stable job. But now, people may be saying, I'm really unhappy with what I'm doing. And maybe this is the time to make a change that maybe I wouldn't have considered before. So that's what I mean by an opportunity.
I love that you described it as like a snow globe. It's like everything being shaken up. And I hadn't considered that, on the hiring end of things, that this situation has created also a different perspective for people that are hiring. That's what positive psychology does, isn't it? It opens our perspective. It broadens how we're looking at things. And can you say more about that?
Sure. So that actually was told to me. So I wrote an article about this for Fast Company, and I interviewed 3 thought leaders in the field. One of them is Andrew Seaman. He is the career writer for LinkedIn. So some of you who are on LinkedIn may read his newsletter. He writes a weekly newsletter on what's happening in the job market. And he was the one that actually said to me that he talks to recruiters all the time. And recruiters are the ones that told him that there's going to be a lot more grace in the way that they look at applicants than they might have before, because and actually that snow globe analogy came from Jenny Blake. She wrote the book Pivot. She is a career expert, and she was a career strategist at Google, and she, as a matter of fact, left a fantastic job at Google that most people thought she was crazy for leaving. But she said, you know what? I want to do my own thing. And if I stay here at Google, I'm never going to leave and do my own thing. And so she was the one that used that snow globe analogy when I interviewed her for this article. And so I think that, there's a lot of different ways that people can see this as an opportunity now. I mean, certainly it's challenging, and I don't want to minimize the challenges, because for any of you who are on this webinar today who have been furloughed or who have lost a job, I don't want to minimize that, because it's tough. And it's, I just want to acknowledge that. But there are, in amongst that, there are opportunities. And so I just want to, say that it's the and. This is the reality, and there are also opportunities. And that's what positive psychology teaches us. It's about the end.
So true. And well, some of you on the call actually might remember Jenny Blake. She was in the house at the JCC in January. A dear friend of hers is Kelly McGonigal, who we've had on the call.
Yes.
And so Kelly, Jenny interviewed Kelly live at the JCC for the book launch, and then we had this amazing Nia dance party, as well as the most interesting book launch. Talk about opportunities and,
Yes.
and changing things. And Jenny's great, so I'm so glad that you got a chance to talk to her and work with her. And yes, we really, does everybody remember how when we had Maria Serwa on and she was talking about the pond and the swamp, and that each day we have something from the pond and we have something from the swamp, but the resilience is when we spend more time in the pond. And how can we do that as we're thinking about our career? And I love that this course that you took at Stanford, Designing Your Life, and how that sort of influences you as well. Can you talk a little bit about that and how we can think about this right now?
So there is a book that was developed by two Stanford professors called Designing Your Life. And they have a book that launched just before COVID, so I don't think it's gotten a lot of press, called Designing Your Work Life. And their premise, I'm trying to remember their names now, so forgive me. But their premise is that we can look at our careers or our life the way that technical product designers look at designing a product, which means it's a series of small experiments. And actually, Jenny uses different, thank you so much, Dave Evans and Bill Burnett. And I took the certification program with Bill Burnett, he's amazing. Jenny Blake uses similar methodology, although she uses different terminology, but the idea is the same. So if you want to make a career change, the idea is to have small experiments. Bill and Dave call it prototyping. And it comes from, in their terminology, it comes from the way people design products. So if someone wants to design this iPhone, for example, the product designer may have an idea in mind as to how to go about where the keyboard should go, where the buttons should go, but before they actually create the product for sale, they're going to prototype it and they're going to have people test it out. And in that testing process, the people who test it will say to them, you know what, I don't really like the keyboard here or the on button there. I really think it should go in a different place. And that's what prototyping is. And through that process, product designers learn what people really want, not what designers think they want. And the same is true in making a career transition. So they have a great example in their book. So the example they use of many is a woman who decides that she wants to open a coffee shop. She comes out of the corporate world and she said, oh, what I really want to do is I want to open a coffee shop. And so she goes out and she rents a space and she opens this coffee shop. And after about 6 months or so, she decides she hates it. Why does she hate it? Because she is a prisoner to this space. So everyone that comes in loves it. You know, they love chatting with their, you know, the people that they meet. They love getting the coffee there. But what she had in her mind's eye of how this was going to work was not the reality. Now, their prototyping idea was if she had gone out and talked to coffee shop owners of what it was really like before she had gone out and opened this coffee shop, she might have learned what some of the drawbacks were and what she might have done differently before she actually launched this business. That's what prototyping is about. So my recommendation when I'm working with people who want to make a career change is to go out and have these small experiments, as Jenny Blake calls them, or prototype them by talking to people who've already made the change. So you're not just assuming what it's going to be like. You talk to people who have done it and you know what's involved. And I will say there are other considerations that I just wanted to bring up. And I have a slide, if it's okay if I share that slide.
Absolutely.
Okay,
Let's go ahead.
thank you. So let me just go ahead and grab that. Okay. So I'm just going to move ahead here. And these are some of the considerations that I wanted to mention. So one of them, and Jenny actually talks about this, is your risk tolerance. And she said you really need to think about your riskometer. And one of the points that she made to me when I interviewed her is the fact that COVID, and I will add, in addition to COVID, what we've all been experiencing, vicariously this week, after the horrible shooting of George Floyd, and is that we all are experiencing an extreme amount of anxiety already. So if we are thinking about making a career change, I'm not just talking about getting a new job, I'm talking about making a change. Realize that now our anxiety levels are already high. So you have to consider your own riskometer in this. And what Jenny says is you don't want to go into the red zone that I have on this slide. So that's an important consideration. Also, if you look on the right side of this slide, you'll see the runway that I have portrayed here. If you're thinking of a significant transition, meaning switching industries or switching functions, there is the probability or possibility that you will be without an income or a reduced income for a period of time. And the reason for that is the low-hanging fruit when you're changing jobs is to change into what you've been doing before. And that's low-hanging fruit because hiring managers understand what you've been doing and they're more receptive to hiring you when you've been, when you're interviewing for what you've been doing before. But when you're making a transition, you have to convince a hiring manager that you're the right person for that job. And that's going to take time, and you might need to be without an income for a period of time. So you have to consider that you need a runway, and that runway is a financial runway. And so those are some of the considerations that I wanted to bring up. I also wanted to mention, and I also wanted to bring into this conversation, for those people that can't make a transition or are not in a position, excuse me, to make a transition at this point in time, I wanted to spend a few minutes talking about how they might, what psychologists call craft their jobs to be happier in the situation that they're in currently. So, but I just wanted to mention before I go to that, 3 really important keys to transitioning to a new job or a new career. And these are absolutely critical, and it doesn't matter whether it's a new job or a new career. The first is to identify your transferable skills and your strengths. I'm sure on some of these webinars, you've talked about the VIA strengths before, and some of you, who are logged in today have taken the VIA Strengths Assessment. So you need to know and should know what your strengths are, and also from a job perspective, what your transferable skills are. That's absolutely critical, because that's how you market yourself, is to know what you have, that's important and valuable to an employer. Secondly, are informational interviews. People get their jobs most often through their network, not by applying online. So I heard the dialogue while I was trying to log in earlier, and I know a number of you are considering making a job or a career change. And I just want to stress to you that applying online is usually a worthless exercise. I'm sorry to be so blunt about it, but applying online by itself without networking into the organization that you're interested in usually does not result in in getting the response that you're looking for. So I just wanted to mention that as well. And thirdly, and this actually came from Andrew Seaman at LinkedIn, sharing content is very, very valuable if you want to distinguish yourself from another job seeker or career changer out there. So you can create content if you like to write, and LinkedIn has a great platform for doing that. There's a blogging platform right there. But if you're not comfortable doing that, find an article that you think is interesting and just, copy the URL and share it with the content. And one of the things Andrew said to me is, if you share content that's relevant to people in your industry, they will know that you are up on the latest in what people are reading and thinking about. So that's very valuable in the way that you can position yourself as an expert. So now I do want to shift, unless there are questions, and if there are, Phoebe or Carolyn, I'm really happy to take questions before I segue into this topic of job crafting and how to tailor the job that you have to be happier in what you're doing. Any questions?
Yeah, one of the things that I was noticing that I've been hearing a lot about, and I wonder if you've been hearing this too, is that people are saying, the way that I was doing this before is not the way I'm doing my job now. So in other words, although I'm with the same organization,
yes,
my job is different because of COVID-19. I'm, for example, working on a more virtual platform than I am in a brick and mortar situation.
Right.
And I actually don't want to go back to doing what I was doing in my same company when I go back. So in a way that's like crafting too, isn't it?
it is.
Yeah,
It very much is.
so you have that situation as well. And I wonder if you guys, you can let us know, are you in the situation where you realized, oh my goodness, I love the company I'm working for, but I like actually what I'm doing now in my job, and I wasn't doing that. Or I realize I'm good at something because of this situation. There's also
the latter of what you just said, I realize I'm good at something and I love it, really speaks to job crafting. So really what job crafting is, I'll just explain it quickly. The term job crafting, let me just put a slide up quickly. And
yeah, there was actually a question about the VIA strengths. So
oh, sure.
What is the name of the test that helps you identify your strengths? It's the VIA Strengths Assessment.
Right.
And there were several people. Thank you, Dana, for letting everybody know, and Phoebe as well. And do you use that in your career coaching? Do you have people that you'll have them take the VIA Strengths Assessment?
Yeah, so I use a variety of different strengths assessments. There are some that are a little more vocationally oriented. So just to go back, so the VIA is, you can go to via.org. I think, Phoebe, you put it in the chat room. Thank you. So you can go to via.org and take it there. It's a free assessment. It's a fantastic, that's a fantastic assessment. Sometimes I use Gallup. Gallup has Strengths Finders 2.0, which is a little more career oriented. And so sometimes I use that one. But I do like to use a strengths assessment because as a positive psychology coach, I really believe in focusing on people's strengths. The research shows that developing your strengths rather than shoring up your weaknesses really results in much greater outcomes, in much better outcomes. Marcus Buckingham, who used to be with the Gallup organization. And I don't know, I think he's independent now. But if you Google Marcus Buckingham, you'll find a number of videos that he has put out. And he has some fantastic videos on strengths and on how to define a strength. And, basically what he says is shoring up your weaknesses is not the way to thrive in your career. To thrive in your career, you want to enhance your strengths and utilize your strengths. And so when I work with a client, I really hone in with them on their strengths. And I use a number of different other assessments as well, not only strengths assessments, but I think it's absolutely vital for people to know what their strengths are. And to understand where they have used their strengths during times of difficulty, because when they have used their strengths during times of difficulty, they can then imagine when they can use those strengths in times of challenge going forward. And that's really, really very valuable. And job crafting really relies on knowing what your strengths are so that you can utilize them. And so this is what I wanted to show. So these are 3 psychologists who have done the bulk of the research in job crafting. The one on the left, I don't know what happened to her name, but this is Jane Dutton. On top is Justin Berg from Stanford, and below Amy Resniewski. She had been at Yale. I'm not sure that she's still there. And they have done the bulk of the research on job crafting. And so I'll talk about a very famous study that Dutton and Resniewski conducted about hospital workers. And these hospital workers did the most menial jobs in hospitals. I mean, they cleaned hospital rooms. That's what their jobs were. And they were asked, do you consider your job to be a job, meaning a paycheck, a career, meaning a step to something greater, or a calling, meaning do you see meaning in it? Do you find meaning in it? And interestingly, the majority of these hospital workers answered that they found their jobs to be a calling. Now, how many people would think that hospital workers who change, clean rooms, change bedding, would see their work as a calling? And when I heard about this study originally, it blew my mind. I just have to say that. I was like, how could this possibly be? But here's the reason. So if you take their job description as it's written on a piece of paper, to clean the rooms of a patient, most people would not find that particularly meaningful. But here's what happened. Many of them engaged patients or patient families in conversation. And that's how they crafted their job. So their supervisors didn't come to them and say, please speak to the patients when you go into their rooms. They just started doing this. And as a result, because of these conversations, they started to experience great meaning in their jobs because they could see the difference that they were making in the lives of the patients and their families, and therefore they started to see their jobs as a calling. And so what the study indicated is it doesn't matter what kind of job you have, and I think COVID has proved this as well, that frontline workers, they could be in a grocery store. They could be EMTs. They could be people mopping the floor of hospitals today, but they are finding meaning in what they're doing. and because, they're helping people out in the midst of this pandemic. So how can you put this to work in your own job? So there are 3 ways in which Duttenberg and Wisniewski came up with that you can craft your jobs. So the hospital workers did what they term relational crafting. They built relationships. They built relationships with the probably with other staff members, but with the hospital patients and with family members. And they built a sense of belonging. They built a sense of contribution, and therefore a sense of meaning. And that and then elevated their jobs from being a paycheck to to something much greater. Now, there are other ways to craft jobs, and I'm going to show you an example in a moment. So one is cognitive crafting. That's how you think about the work that you do. So let's take an example. Let's say you're a factory worker and you've been working for one of the auto manufacturers that are now building ventilators during the COVID crisis. And you're on the line every day, and your work is very monotonous. You're just putting parts into machines every single day. And what meaning do you see in this? Well, if you can think about the fact that you are putting parts into ventilators that are potentially saving the lives of patients, that's cognitive crafting. You can see the meaning in what you're doing, and then again, elevating your work in a way that you see it differently. And then finally, there's task crafting, which is the last thing that I'm going to talk about, which is the way in which, and that's actually, Carolyn, what you were talking about, where somebody during, maybe working at home, takes on different tasks as a result of working at home, and maybe their job has shifted in some ways, and realizes that something that they're doing that's new is something that they love that they hadn't been doing before. So that's really the idea behind job crafting, is that you think about, what are you good at? What do you love to do that maybe you haven't been doing, and how can you bring it into your work? So this is an example, and I'm going to run through it very quickly, of somebody in a marketing department. And what I'm going to ask you to focus on is just the size of the boxes. So the biggest boxes at the top, and again, this was research done by the 3 psychologists that I talked about earlier. So this person in the marketing department is spending most of her time on monitoring performance of her team, answering their questions and, problem solving, and analyzing and directing marketing research. What's critical to the team actually is down below. Their professional development and designing marketing strategies. But you can see from the axis that this is where she is spending the least amount of her time. And interestingly, when she evaluated what she was most interested in and where her skills were, it was in the bottom boxes. It was around designing marketing strategies and the professional development of her team. So what she did was this, and this is a bit of an eye test. So let me just try and make it simple for you. What she did was, she said her motives were to develop more meaningful relationships. She evaluated her strengths, which were one-on-one communications and technical savvy. So they're in the blue circles. And then her passions were teaching others and using and learning new technology. So very simply, what she did was if you look at the size of the boxes the boxes of monitoring team performance and, problem solving, they got smaller. And she inserted a box here, which was designing marketing strategies that use social media and professional development. So she then crafted her job to teach her colleagues how to use social media. And so she didn't just do this by herself. She had to get buy-in, and I'll talk momentarily about how to do this. But she thought about first, what was going to motivate her? Okay, so that's here. So her personal growth, we're building meaningful relationships and the personal growth. Her strengths, again, you can take the Gallup Strengths Finders or the VIA assessment, the via.org, where you can go to take that. If you haven't taken a strengths assessment, you can do that to identify them. And then her passion, teaching others. And then she came up with, she was going to teach her staff how to design and implement marketing strategies that use social media. And that's how she crafted her job. So how do you do this? So if you're in a job where you want to craft your job because maybe it's just not working for you the way you want it to, first, you focus on creating value for others. Number two, you build trust. So you have to go to your manager and other stakeholders. And those are the people, and that's what I mean by identifying the people who will support you. And basically, you're going to come up with an internal marketing campaign to convince people how it's going to benefit the organization. So you know how it's going to benefit you, but remember, you're not an island. So you have to do this in a way that is going to benefit you, not only you, but the organization. And really, that's what job crafting is all about. Questions?
Yes, I love this idea of an internal marketing campaign. And your book was, your book is about the inner critic.
Yes.
So one of the things that it would seem to me that would get in the way of developing an inner marketing campaign could be my inner critic.
Yes.
Can you talk about that a little bit?
Sure. So I'll tell you why I wrote the book. So as a coach working with people to help them manage their careers, most of my clients are mid-career professionals or executives. And I have found that no matter how successful they are or have been, most of them have an inner critic that speaks very loudly. They're very, very self-critical. And when I look at what they've accomplished objectively, I'm like, how is this even possible? So, I realize that, most of us may have had an upbringing where, maybe our parents were very harsh. Maybe it was all about succeeding and doing better and getting the next degree or the next promotion or the next raise. And that's what we internalized in our heads. So I wanted to look at what the positive psychology research said about how we could quell our inner saboteur. And that's why I took on writing this book and it's really a workbook, actually. God bless you. It's really a workbook because it has exercises at the end of every chapter where people dealing with, different issues. It could be, how do I deal with failure? Or, how do I talk back to that inner critic? Can actually engage in these exercises and see that a lot of times the assumptions we're making are just that, they're just assumptions, and that there are other ways that we can, we can deal with these things. And through my coaching, what I hope to do is to help people see themselves really objectively and not through the lens of the inner critic.
I was thinking about both Michael Steger, who was his work on meaning, and how you were talking about the hospital workers and how they essentially were finding meaning, and how that is a really important driver in thinking about career, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. And, I'll tell you just about an interesting conversation I was having with a client yesterday. So he had contacted me because he had 2 job offers and he was struggling to decide which one to take. So we had a conversation about it. And, as a coach, I try not to give advice. I think good coaches ask questions. So I said to him, one of these opportunities is clearly riskier than the other. One was in a startup, one was in a large company. I said, how do you feel about the risk of one versus the other? And his response to me was, I don't really think about it in terms of the risk. I think about it in terms of quality of life. So I said, well, on a scale of 1 to 10, how would you evaluate your quality of life if you were to take option A, and how would you evaluate your quality of life if you were to take option B? And he said, well, if I were to take option A, my quality of life would be a 9. If I were to take option B, my quality of life would be a 5. So I said, well, then why would you compromise your quality of life if there's if there's a 40% difference between option A and option B? And his answer to me was, well, because my parents taught me that I should always go after the most difficult option. Now, I was telling him, so he had shared with me that his partner had survived cancer and that he has an elderly parent who's doing well, but he'd like to spend more time with that elderly parent. So I was telling him just coincidentally that I was reading David Brooks' new book on the second mountain. I don't know if any of you have read it or are reading it. I was very profoundly touched by this book because David Brooks tells his own story. And the first mountain is about climbing to success. Okay. The second mountain is about what he calls climbing to joy. And it's about really giving to other people and being in community with other people as a way of finding joy. But the way David Brooks got to the second mountain is that his life fell apart when his wife of 27 years said, I'm divorcing you because you have never been present for our marriage. And David Brooks had to acknowledge that was true. So I told my client this story and I said to him, I can't tell you what to do. And he said, okay, please give me your advice. And I said, I would not compromise quality of life. You just told me that your partner had cancer. You told me that you want to spend more time with your elderly parent. And I'm telling you what profoundly affected me by reading David Brooks. And I said, and then he said to me, thank you. You helped me make the decision. So, I think that the inner critic, we often don't recognize it because sometimes it goes back to such early experiences that we don't even realize that they're at play. And oftentimes, and he then said to me, it was my parents telling me that I had to strive harder. And this is also someone who for 30 years lived on a plane, was never home because his job required him to be traveling constantly. So it's not like he hadn't paid his dues. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. And I think that, gosh, a lot of us are having this time of COVID as a time of reflection,
Yes.
right? There has been a question in the chat about whether people can get your slides. If you would send that to me and that we could
Sure.
send that out with the recording.
Sure.
Fantastic.
Sure.
And I was also struck by, something that you were saying regarding relational crafting and and the keys to transitions. And I was thinking that isn't internship a form of prototyping and
Absolutely. Oh, yes.
and volunteering a form of
Oh,
prototyping?
yes, both.
Yeah,
Absolutely. Yes.
right.
Thank you for bringing that up.
Yeah,
Yes.
and someone said here, I'm a 70-something and would like to get back to work. Retirement is so boring. Yet, even when I was 50-something, I was turned down for several jobs that I knew I was qualified for because of my age. It's a
Mhm.
lot easier for an employment officer to train a 20-something than a 50-something. And he won't have to hire someone else 10 or 15 years down the line. Any suggestions about that? Thank you, Paul, for that question.
So, Paul, ageism is real. I'm not going to lie. It's real and alive. Use your network. Really use your network. If a company is run, I'll tell you a story about a former client of mine who was in his 60s, is in his 60s when he landed his last job just a few months ago. Um, he got introduced to a CEO who was also in his 60s. So you're likely not going to get hired by the 28-year-old CEO. But there still are the working, baby boomers out there. And if you can connect with them and find out what they're doing and be able to talk to them about the value that you can add, I think that might be a way of engaging. It's not through online, applications. So I don't know if it's a lengthier conversation, but it's not recruiters that are going to hire you. Stay away from recruiters. That's my big recommendation.
And then we had another question.
Yes.
In an interview situation, since we want to focus on our strengths, how do you recommend someone answering the question, which is always asked? It's really true. What are your weaknesses?
Okay. So the weakness question, there's a two-part answer to the weakness question. So the weakness question is asked. First, it's important to understand why the question gets asked. So the question gets asked because people want to know, are you self-aware? Anybody that answers the question, I don't have any weaknesses, will be shown the door, and that will be the end of your interviewing process. So the way I suggest answering the question is to focus on something that has been a weakness for you that you've been working on, and to turn the answer to what you've been doing about it. So let me give you an example. So let's say that speaking in front of a group is not something that you have seen, that you don't feel is a strength of yours. So you might say, for example, well, speaking in front of large groups has not been a strength of mine. But what I've done as a result is I've gone to Toastmasters. And so as a result of going to Toastmasters, I've gotten their such and such award. And now when asked to give presentations, in the office, I volunteer so that I can get more practice speaking in front of groups. So what you want to do is you want to pivot the answer to talking about what you've done to improve yourself in that particular area.
Wonderful. And what is your advice for someone who's already made a career change, but is being impacted by COVID and getting clients? They're in a business where they have to actually get clients can be challenging. She's a personal transformation coach. This is Nancy.
Oh, so Nancy, I don't know what you're doing to market yourself. Some of the things I'll tell you that I have done is I've joined professional networking groups. So in the Boston area, for example, there is something called the Boston Club. It's a group for women professionals. And I'm sure, in New York, there are other networking groups. I particularly like women's groups because I think women support other women. And I know in our group, it used to be, we have about 1,000 members, and it used to be mostly corporate members, but it really has shifted most recently to entrepreneurs. And we have a focus in the group now to entrepreneurs in this group, entrepreneurs supporting other entrepreneurs. And we're actually having a kickoff meeting tomorrow, to talk about how we can support each other. I've also joined the Boston Chamber of Commerce. They have a women's leadership group. So, that's some of the ways in which, I get out there. And I also do a lot of social media marketing. So, it's kind of a combination of things. I think you always have to be out there. I also find that writing for high-profile publications, though it takes time to do that, has helped me market myself professionally.
I was thinking also, Susan, about something that we went over in the weekend, which is this ought voice, your the voice, your real voice.
Yes.
And then your ideal. And that most of us spend our time between what I should do
Yes.
and what I'm actually doing, and not that much time thinking about what is my dream, what is my ideal, what am I good at, and I think what you're talking about with the inner critic is that, aren't you, that you're talking about sort of changing that conversation between just what I ought to do and what I am doing to what do I really want to do as an important part of thinking about this career transition.
Absolutely. Because, if you're going to make a career transition, you have to want to do it. There has to be a reason, and the reason has to be more than money. Study after study has shown that, beyond a certain income level, earning more money does not make people happier. So it's really intrinsic versus extrinsic motivation. And people have to be intrinsically motivated to do something, making a career transition is challenging. It takes time, it takes effort. And if you're going to do it, you have to have an intrinsic motivation. You have to know what that is in order to go forward to make it happen, because it's not going to happen overnight. So you're making a very good point.
And can't we also access our strengths by thinking about stories of people that we are exemplars to us, somebody that has done something that we really admire, and writing down what those qualities are, or a time when we've been really successful and writing those qualities down, and then sort of accessing, wow, I admire this. And if I'm seeing it in other people, gosh, I must also have that.
Absolutely. That's a great strategy. That's a terrific strategy. Yes.
Yeah, fantastic. And we had another question about, which might be more lengthy than we have time for because we only have a few minutes. But I have been a marketer for many years, and I have a solid network of marketers. I wish to pivot into change management, leadership development, and need to begin to build a network of organizational developmental leaders. What suggestions do you have for me to break into these kind of networks, which are different than the networks I previously have been involved in?
So I would identify those people on LinkedIn. And the good thing about COVID right now is people are working out of their homes. So I would send them an invitation on LinkedIn, customized, and I would ask them if you could speak to them for 10 or 15 minutes to get their advice as to how they got into the field. Would they be willing to give you advice? How did they get into the field? And maybe look for people that have made the transition from another career previously. And LinkedIn is a great resource to do that.
Well, Susan, I cannot thank you enough for joining us. This is such important wisdom, and I can see how you've married it to positive psychology and the interventions, the micro moments, making these small changes, thinking about ways in which we can try things out like prototypes and actually experiment, thinking about what we love to do, what has meaning for us. It really is a beautiful marriage of your expertise and skills and talents with with practicality. What can we actually do at this time?
Well, thank you so much. And I just want to say for people that are still on, you are welcome to go to my website. I have some free ebooks there. You are more than welcome to download them or link to me on LinkedIn. So I'd love to stay in touch. And thank you again to the JCC and the Whole Being Institute for hosting me today. It was such a great pleasure.
Fantastic. And don't forget to tune in to tomorrow. We are going to be talking about Leader Mom and also Cindy Stack on leadership. And then tomorrow's conversation will be with Catherine Flavin, motherhood as an asset for leadership. And then, of course, Cindy Stack will be talking about leadership as well. This has been a great week of transcending yesterday with Scott and career transitions today with Susan, and again, leadership with Catherine and Cindy later on this week. Thank you so much, everybody. Thank you to Phoebe for manning the chat. Please have an amazing day. Take care of yourselves, and we'll see you tomorrow.
Thank you, Susan.
Thank you. Bye now.